there and welcome back to another Dreamworks video. And today I want to talk about the How to Train Your Dragon franchise, and more specifically, the possible future continuation of that franchise. Now, as we know, the final film in the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy, How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, came out in 2019, and since then, we've had a couple of shorts and whatnot, as well as the release of a new spin-off show set like 1,000 or so years in the future. So the franchise is still somewhat active. Maybe no animated feature films are coming anytime soon, but they're producing content and they're keeping it alive. But that being said, there have been some rumours flying around about a reboot / spin-off / live action adaptation. Nothing really concrete, but whispers that there might be something in the works, even if it's just early days discussion. And it might be nothing. But I still think it's worth a look, worth a bit of discussion, and so that's what I want to talk about today. Would a live action adaptation of How to Train Your Dragon be something that anybody really wants, needs? Would it be a genius smash hit, or a complete box office blunder? And I think it is hard to predict that kind of thing to begin with, because from what we've seen with Disney, it really is a bit of a mixed bag. For the most part, the live action remakes are not really all that well received from a critical point of view. Like, you have some, like the first Alice in Wonderland film or the first Maleficent film, that are considered quite good and a fun reinvention of a classic film. But then there are others, like the recent Pinocchio, which are just worse than the original in every single possible way. And then the Lion King remake, which, well, it certainly exists. And then on top of that, from the poor quality ones, there are also two different ends of the spectrum. On one hand, you have Pinocchio, which is part of the Disney Plus era of these remakes, where they probably saw the writing on the wall in terms of diminishing returns and decided to send them all to streaming instead. And fair enough for this one. Like I said, it's actual vomit tier. You come out of that film feeling robbed of the hour of your life you gave up to watch it. And then on the other hand, you have the Lion King remake, which was an immense smash hit that broke box office records in terms of animated films, as ultimately it isn't really even a live action remake, it's just a hyper-realistic animation style. But yeah, it broke records and is still the highest grossing animated film of all time, and realistically is going to stay as the highest grossing for the foreseeable future. I just don't see what film could possibly challenge it at this point. I mean, so many people went to see it just for the spectacle and the nostalgia factor. I think only Frozen 2 has really come close to its gross, so maybe if they ever make a Frozen 3, that might be a possible contender to knock it out of top spot, if they ever make a Frozen 3. I mean, the money certainly is an attractive prospect though. But there was like 6 years between installments, and we're only 4 years out from the last one, so... And Disney slowed their releases and seems to be wanting to do new things, so I doubt we're going to see any continuation for another couple of years, if ever.
You're a fucking idiot.
And all of this rambling about Disney is my roundabout way of telling you that, simply put, it's impossible to say whether something's going to be a financial success for these live action remakes. But I do think there's a way of telling if it's going to be well received. So you have to answer some questions. Is there a demand for a remake? And is there a new way of telling the story that's available to you? And that's really what you have to do when you're looking at things from a How to Train Your Dragon perspective. Is there a demand to see Hiccup and Toothless return in a new format? And is there a new way of telling the story of these characters? Can you reinvent the plot of the films to frame it from a different perspective? As after all, that's what's worked best for Disney. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think that How to Train Your Dragon can actually fulfill these criteria. And I'm not sure you ever can, because in terms of demand, I can't think of a single time I've ever heard somebody yearn for a live action version of these films. They so very obviously, clearly work best as an animated film. So why bother remaking it? Just to try and suck as much money out of your pockets as possible? It feels like a surefire way to kill off any goodwill from the fans, if you ask me. I mean, you want to see a live action How to Train Your Dragon? Go watch Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon. Hell, one of the sequences from House of the Dragon feels like it directly pays homage to How to Train Your Dragon 1. Just watch that if you need your fix. 2 vaguely medieval settings with dragons involved. There you go. And on top of that, I just don't see a way to make How to Train Your Dragon fresh. How to attack it from a different angle. Like, some of the Disney remakes work because they're fleshing out villains' backstories, or fleshing out the female characters that were sort of left by the wayside back in the 60s, 70s, the 50s, 40s, you know, all of that. But Dragons is a much more modern franchise that does handle those characters and those things a whole lot better. Not perfectly, but a lot better. And so I can't really think of a good way to change things, what angle you could take to try and make it more unique. I mean, I guess you could have Toothless be a special talking dragon, but that sounds god-awful, trash tier. Like I said, how do you take the narrative and flip it around? When by doing that, you're simply taking everything and making it actively worse. I just don't think it's possible. It would legit ruin everything. Anything they do would always be compared to the original film. And so I just don't see how it comes out of this comparison favourably. Long story short, nothing they make could ever live up to the film's legacy. On top of that, it just feels like it would be ridiculously difficult to film, you know? The dragons would need so much CGI. Think of all the different dragons and all those scenes where you need to have a whole heap of the dragons together. Not just Toothless, not just the rest of the major dragons, but the huge alpha dragons, and then all the background dragons, the extras, so to speak. You can't just copy and paste it a million times. A lot of them are going to need unique designs, and in the end, that's going to lead to a pretty hefty budget. So already, that's a pretty decent sized risk for whoever would make this. I mean, who would make this? Does Dreamworks even have a live action division anymore? Apparently they do, but they don't make films like this. So a different division would probably get handed this by Universal. But yeah, to do it justice and not have it look tacky or like absolute dog shit, that would need a lot of money. But the problem is there's no guarantee this movie would get the money back at the box office. After all, whilst the original films did do well, they weren't exactly huge either. Just a nice, serviceable revenue stream. And so because of that, I feel like these live action adaptations should be saved for a home run that's going to be a massive hit. Otherwise, it's just too risky in my eyes. The risk-reward ratio is just all out of balance. And I could easily foresee this being a box office bomb. And a critical bomb now that I think about it. Ultimately, I just don't see why a How to Train Your Dragon live action film would ever be made. And why it would ever be in the works. It just very much feels like a case of been there, done that. There isn't room for anything new or fresh. And so I think that Dreamworks would be better served trying to make something new instead of going the Disney route and remaking their old classics for diminishing returns. And hell, these films aren't even old in the first place. It's been 4 years since the last one. Give it some more time to breathe at the very least, for God's sake. But yeah, I think I'll call the video here. I don't really have much else to say. And so with all that being said, I would like to remind you that this has just been my opinions and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of a How to Train Your Dragon live action film? Would you like to see one? Do you think it would be a good idea, or maybe you think it would be god awful? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.